Hook. What if I told you that behind closed doors Washington is tightening the screws on Iran in a way that could redraw the entire Middle East, and that the shockwaves of this move are already rattling Moscow? Tonight's story isn't about rumors or social media noise. It's about a chain reaction that could push the world from economic pressure to open confrontation faster than anyone expects. In the past few days, U.S. officials have signaled a dramatic escalation in their approach toward Iran, mixing threats of military action with unprecedented economic warfare aimed not just at Tehran, but at every country that dares to trade with it. Iran says it is ready for war, but also open to talks, a dangerous combination that often comes right before explosions, not agreements. Meanwhile, Russia is watching every step, issuing warnings and preparing for a future where today's pressure on Iran could become tomorrow's global conflict. This is not just another political headline. It is a story about how a single decision in Washington could ignite a fire that spreads far beyond the Middle East. For years the confrontation between the United States and Iran has been simmering just below the surface, flaring up in moments of crisis and then slipping back into uneasy calm, but what is unfolding now feels fundamentally different. This time Washington is not only talking about pressure, it is constructing a web of economic and political measures designed to isolate Tehran completely, and the message is blunt. This is no longer about nudging Iran back to the negotiating table, it is about forcing a strategic collapse in its ability to act as a regional power. Officials close to the administration describe the new policy as the final phase of a long campaign, one that aims to drain Iran's resources, fracture its alliances, and make the cost of defiance unbearable not only for Tehran but for anyone who continues to do business with it. At the center of this strategy is the idea that Iran's greatest strength has never been its conventional military, but its ability to survive under sanctions by weaving itself into the global economy through back channels, friendly governments, and gray market trade. Oil shipments disguised under foreign flags, financial transactions routed through sympathetic banks, and quiet energy deals with countries desperate for cheap fuel have allowed Tehran to keep its economy alive even when it was officially cut off from the world. Washington's new approach seeks to destroy that lifeline. By threatening punitive tariffs or financial penalties on any country or company that trades with Iran, the United States is effectively telling the world that neutrality is no longer an option. Either you cut ties with Tehran or you pay a price that could cripple your own economy. This is a radical escalation because it does not just target Iran, it targets the global network that has made Iran resilient. Energy markets are already nervous, not because a war has started, but because the mere possibility of secondary sanctions is enough to make traders, insurers, and shipping companies pull back. No oil tanker wants to be the one caught in the crossfire of a new American enforcement regime. No bank wants to discover that a routine transaction has suddenly made it ineligible to operate in the U.S. financial system. In modern geopolitics, that system is the bloodstream of global commerce, and Washington knows it. By weaponizing access to the dollar and the American market, the United States is using economic gravity itself as a tool of coercion. Inside Iran, the pressure is being felt in ways that go far beyond balance sheets. Inflation, already a daily reality for ordinary families, is accelerating. Essential goods are becoming harder to find or harder to afford. Small businesses that once depended on imported parts or foreign customers are closing their doors. The government insists it can manage, that it has survived worse, but the mood on the streets tells a different story. Protests that once focused on local grievances are increasingly turning political, with slogans that point directly at the leadership and its costly foreign adventures. When officials in Tehran say they are prepared for war but open to negotiation, they are speaking not just to Washington, but to their own people, trying to project strength while signaling that they know how precarious the situation has become. The United States is counting on that internal strain to do what decades of sanctions have failed to achieve: force a recalculation in Tehran about the price of resistance. Yet this time there is also a clear undercurrent of impatience. American officials are no longer talking only about compliance with nuclear agreements or regional behavior, they are talking about changing the equation entirely. In private briefings, the argument is that Iran's current system cannot be allowed to continue in a form that threatens U.S. allies, disrupts shipping lanes, and emboldens militant groups across the Middle East. Economic pressure, they believe, is the cleanest way to weaken that system without firing a shot, but they are also making it clear that all options remain on the table. That phrase, so often repeated in diplomatic language, now carries a sharper edge. Military planners are openly discussing scenarios that range from targeted strikes on infrastructure to cyber operations designed to cripple Iran's energy sector and financial networks. Even if no missiles are launched, the knowledge that these plans exist is part of the pressure campaign. It is meant to remind Tehran that the economic squeeze is not an end in itself but a prelude, a narrowing corridor in which every step becomes more dangerous. For the wider world, the implications are enormous. Countries that have long balanced relations with both Washington and Tehran are being forced to choose. Nations in Asia that rely on Iranian oil must now decide whether cheaper energy is worth the risk of U.S. retaliation. European states that once championed diplomacy find their room to maneuver shrinking as banks and corporations refuse to engage in any activity that might trigger American penalties. The global economy, already fragile, is being asked to absorb yet another shock, and markets are reacting not to what has happened but to what might happen next. The American administration argues that this pain is temporary and necessary, that a short-term disruption is preferable to allowing Iran to continue its current trajectory unchecked. Critics, however, warn that this kind of all-encompassing pressure rarely produces clean outcomes. History is full of examples where sanctions hardened resolve instead of breaking it, where leaders used external threats to rally domestic support and silence dissent. There is a real risk that Tehran, feeling cornered, will lash out not in a conventional war but through proxies, cyberattacks, or disruption of critical shipping routes, creating a cascade of crises that no one fully controls. What makes the current moment especially volatile is the broader geopolitical backdrop. The United States is not applying this pressure in a vacuum. It is doing so at a time when great power competition is intensifying, when Russia and China are actively seeking to build alternative economic and political structures that reduce dependence on the West. For Moscow and Beijing, the campaign against Iran is not just about Tehran, it is a test case. If Washington can successfully isolate a major regional power by threatening the entire global trading system, then no country that challenges U.S. interests is truly safe. This is why Russia's reaction has been so sharp. Official statements warn against intervention, but behind the scenes the concern runs deeper. Russia has invested years in building ties with Iran, from military cooperation to energy projects. Those ties are not just economic, they are strategic, part of a vision of a multipolar world where U.S. dominance is diluted by alternative alliances. An American campaign that crushes Iran's ability to operate internationally is therefore seen in Moscow not as a regional issue but as a direct challenge to that vision. Yet Washington seems undeterred by these warnings. The logic in the White House is that delaying decisive action only emboldens adversaries. From this perspective, the pressure on Iran is both a message to Tehran and a signal to others that the United States is willing to use every tool at its disposal to defend its interests. It is a return to a more muscular form of economic statecraft, one that treats trade and finance not as neutral mechanisms but as weapons. For ordinary people around the world, all of this can feel abstract, but the effects are anything but. Energy prices fluctuate with every new rumor. Shipping insurance premiums rise. Investors pull back from emerging markets. Families in Iran struggle to make ends meet, while families in distant countries pay more for fuel and goods. The ripple effects of Washington's decision are already moving through the global system, invisible but relentless. The question now is not whether the United States has decided to escalate pressure on Iran, that decision is already clear, but where this path leads. Will Tehran bend, seeking a deal that preserves what it can of its economy and influence, or will it dig in, betting that the world will tire of American coercion? Will allies stand firm with Washington, or will the costs become too high to bear? And most dangerously, will a campaign that is meant to avoid war instead create the very conditions that make conflict inevitable? Every statement, every sanction, every warning issued in this unfolding drama adds another layer of tension. The world is watching not a single event but a process, a tightening spiral in which economic pressure, political signaling, and military posturing feed off one another. It is a story still being written, but its opening chapter is unmistakable. The United States has chosen to end the era of half measures with Iran, and in doing so it has set in motion forces that could reshape the balance of power far beyond the Middle East.